G'day, mate. And yes, I mean that ironically, of course. To my Australian friends, you probably know why I mean it ironically. To anyone who isn't Australian, it'd be too hard to explain. My first Australian novel this year has been The Heart is a Star by Megan Rogers. It's a beautiful cover, isn't it? I really like that cover. And there's a lot happening here for me. So it's going to be a long review, and I'll start off with the non-spoilers, but at some stage, if you're going to read this and you don't want to hear anything spoilery, I'll suggest you go elsewhere. So it's a very well written, very architecturally planned out, I guess you'd say, novel. It's a debut novel, but the author has considerable literary background. So she had a PhD in 2014, I think, which resulted in a non-fiction book. She's been teaching writing ever since. She began as an assistant editor at Allen and Unwin. I hate saying anything bad about anything from Allen and Unwin because they've given me so many arcs over the years and I am so grateful. The writing is excellent. The narrative is engrossing in the way it's been plotted and planned. The actual story and storyline are really quite great. The settings are good. Her ability to engage the reader with what they're seeing, so her descriptive abilities are great. I did want to find out how it ends, which is why I finished it. Because for my personal reading tastes, it has issues. That's my personal, very personal reading tastes. A lot of people will love the things that I didn't. So the issues that this book has can be distilled down to two issues from my point of view. One is the main character. Layla is the most eternally, emotionally and mentally scrambled egg I have ever encountered. She usually comes across as stupid, and she, while telling us that she's this anaesthetist with two children and she's got all this stuff happening, she still manages to come across for the first half of the book as almost committably stupid, which I resented. And partly because of that, she's almost unrelatable to in the first part of the novel. Since the narrative here really entirely revolves around Layla. She doesn't have an adventure. She doesn't do a thing. It's all about Layla discovering her past-ish. So your entire book is Layla. And if you're not going to enjoy reading that character, then this book isn't going to be for you because there isn't a lot else in it. In the long term, at least. So the other thing I didn't like is the pacing. The pacing is a flashback methodology that has become so popular and so overused in this last decade or so. So you get this, instead of a single story told on a single timeline, or a single story on a single timeline with occasional flashbacks, what you get is what feels like someone letting off flashes in your brain while you're reading. Flash, 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 flash. It's exactly like that. You'll have a page of present, then you'll have these Russian doll flashbacks. So it's exhausting to read. It's exceptionally good at throwing me off out of the narrative, and it's really, really good at making me lose my patience with the novel. For example, early on in the book, there's this point where she lies down next to her son. She's just got home. Lies down next to her son, flashback to her daughter being born, flashback to something that happened in her childhood, flash forward back, whatever, to something happened after her son was born, and then finally we're back in the present. It's like, I can't enjoy that. Perhaps for someone who reads really, really slowly, that would work, but I don't. I read fast. And, the speed. Now, I'll never trash a book for this characteristic. It's very common in contemporary, at least contemporary Australian. It might be a mainstream media thing. The mainstream media has convinced us all that most people have got an attention span of like 6 seconds, and a lot of contemporary books seem to have taken that on board. So you have a chapter of 3 pages. 2 pages, 3 pages. Okay, chapter 3. Ta-da! Half a page. 1 full page, a tiny bit of a page. 2 pages is not a chapter. That isn't even a section. That's a travesty of my time. And if within these 2 pages you've already got 3 flashbacks as well as a tiny bit of commentary on the present, by now I'm getting really annoyed. So the first half of the book was tough for me. It took me a long time to warm at all in any way to Layla. And at best I only like her in small sections. So let's start with Layla has a demanding job as an anaesthetist on the back of the book. Disintegrating marriage, well, I'd combat that. I'd say it disintegrated a long time ago and you're just trying to resurrect a long dead corpse. 2 young kids, and she's got a lover. She has no time. I don't know why anyway. But none of that is really the problem. She had a problem at work, which I won't disclose. That means that she's now suspended. She's sitting at home all the time. But Layla's single obsession in life isn't her kids or her husband or her lover or her job. It's what happened to her father when she was a child. And ever since, she and her completely dysfunctional family have been or at least she, as part of her dysfunctional family, has been dancing around this concept. Okay, chirp. Come on then. So when they were young, her slightly older sister, I think 6 years older, ran away when she was a teenager and never came back. And then her aunt, her mother's sister, came to live with them, only now she's in a nursing home. But the centre of all this is Layla's relationship with her mother. Her mother still lives in Tassie in the house that Layla grew up in. And she is a train wreck. She's manipulative, she's alcoholic, she's downright abusive. The stories we hear of her childhood are horrible. But still, Layla remembers good things from her childhood because she loved and was close to her dad. She always loved her. She's team dad, but her father died. She doesn't really believe what happened surrounding her father's death. So Layla spent her entire adult years in this... Sorry, but I can't stop now. It's too far in. Sorry about that. Has spent her entire adult life in this knot of anger and resentment over her mother and weirdness over her father dying. It's hard to relate to Layla because she comes across as neurotic and judgmental in the first few chapters. The notion of a grown woman being manipulated by an unsympathetic mother is unfortunately far too common to be unrelatable. But just because I could relate to it didn't mean I enjoyed it. It's a theme that makes me uneasy because I always want to encourage people who are under the thumb of manipulation to free themselves from that emotional slavery. And that was kind of where I was with Layla the whole time. Only Layla was so unlikable in herself that it was a little bit hard to care, to be honest. Anyway, so the other thing about Layla is that she and her husband have a lifestyle revolving around her income. She virtually supports her crap husband's business. In addition to feeling guilty over her crap mother in Tassie, she has 2 kids she feels guilty about being a bad mother over. She feels guilty over something that happened in her job. She has an aunt she feels guilty for putting in a nursing home. She has a job she feels guilty about. She has a lover she feels surprisingly little guilt. The one thing that most people would feel guilt about, that's the one that she doesn't seem to have a lot of guilt for. Though she can't make up her mind what to do about this lover for more than 3 consecutive seconds, giving the author unlimited scope for more flashbacks. So all of that. These Russian doll flashbacks, they hurt. They really did. So the drinking game for The Heart is a Star would be whenever Layla feels guilty about something, take a shot. Whenever Layla says sorry to someone, which she does to every single person in this novel, except herself, at least once, many times sometimes, take another shot. Guilt, sorrow, good Catholic themes, I believe. Don't come from a Catholic background. Don't know. Kind of want to slap it out of her, but can't. So, one last thing for the general masses. A lot of this narrative is really about being a parent. Probably a mother, but sometimes a father, who's pulled between the obligation to continue on their career while still being a super mum or super dad to the children at home. So that combination of family and job is a very nasty trap that has caught up a lot of women in Australia, at least, where they end up exhausted, sick, frazzled and aging before their time because society has told them that they have to do all these things. Layla never questions the things that she's done and whether they're good for her until later in the book. So, but I think what the author is trying to do here is question it. Now, to me, so this book will probably appeal to women who are juggling children and jobs. Though for me, the bits about her work were far more relatable and far more interesting. Sadly, by page 100, I was really ready to hear that both her kids had died in a car accident, so I didn't have to hear any more about them, except in flashbacks, because this book is all about the flashbacks. Now, that was this part of the book. So the first half of the book is schizophrenic, scrambled egg, Russian doll flashbacks that I assume are meant to establish the character of Layla and the situation of her family, and I guess they do that, but they don't do it enjoyably. One person whose review I read after finishing this book said I couldn't put it down. I'm not with that person. I had to put it down. I could only read one segment at a time because they were too disconnected. A chapter would end, the thing that happened next had nothing to do with the previous chapter. Within that chapter, we had 5 flashbacks. It was hectic, and I didn't enjoy it one bit. Now, around about page 22, we finally get to Tasmania. Oh, that's the thing. So in the very first part of the book, Layla is on a phone call to her mother in Tasmania, and her mother is guilting her into how she shouldn't come for Christmas this year. I won't be here. It doesn't matter. I want you to know the truth. But we gather from everyone around Layla that this is a trick that her mother has pulled, Nora, I think her name is, has pulled over and over again. The manipulation level is acute. Nora falls for hook, line and sinker, and of course we know because there's this much book that this time it's going to be true and her mother is actually trying to top herself. Mixed feelings about that one from Layla and indeed from everyone else. Okay. So, yeah. Now, that's the very first page that starts on, and yet we are 1/3 of the book before Layla and her Aunt Dawn even make it to the airport. So that's 1/3 of the book that is virtually all flashbacks. You've got to like flashbacks to like this book. What I'm saying. So around about chapter 22, when we finally make it to Tasmania, things settle down. They don't vanish, but they settle down on the flashback side, and it starts to actually feel like a novel instead of like a schizophrenic episode. And I'm going to read a bit because the narrative, because I've been nothing but complaining about this book so far, and yet the writing is often quite beautiful. So here we go. Page 135. This island, the last place to unzip itself from Antarctica, should be a hulking, desolate rock. If it wasn't for the warm eastern oceanic current that cultivates life, it would be stripped of everything. The way currents are Earth's arteries and veins. Sometimes I think, though, that a land aches to be something, an arid desert, a teeming rainforest, a lifeless stone, and that any attempt to dress it up as something else provokes a volatile response. Beautiful, right? A lot of her descriptive writing is, but it's often isolated from the text. So I don't enjoy that isolation from the text. There's also something weird about that beautiful paragraph grammatically that I haven't quite sorted out yet. Now, 22 is also a noteworthy chapter in that we start to see the breakdown of the flashback system. There's still flashbacking here. The other problem with the early part that I haven't mentioned is you never have conversation. You'll have people making single statements that sound almost oracular, and Layla thinking, I don't know what that means. You're right, Layla. I don't either, because meaning has not been given us. Most people have a conversation and it goes like this. I say something to you. Oh yes, I respond to what you just said. And then I respond to your response, and so the conversation progresses between two people. Not here. It's more like Greek tragedy. Blah, 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 blah. Ho, 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 ho. With no connect and no ability to move forward as a narrative because the people aren't really talking to each other. 22 actually has a small bit where Dawn and Layla have a conversation of at least three subject matters before Dawn lapses back into Oracle mode. Okay, but around about this halfway mark, once we're in Tasmania, the writing settles down, it starts to be a bit prettier, and B, I think it's 26. Is it 26? Yes, 26 is noteworthy in that I believe around about here we have one whole chapter in the present. And I think part of that is that we've introduced the character of Jessie. Oh, okay, it's not the whole chapter. We start in the present. Jessie has a gender story, which is nice. I like Jen. Then we go back in time once, and then for the rest of 26, it's all in the present. Finally, almost 2/3 of the way through the book, we can actually have a narrative. And this is probably where anyone who plans to read this book should go away and read this book and then come back. Because there are some things in this book that really are spoilers. Now, all the way through this book, we're having telegraphed that once she finally makes it to Tasmania, there's going to be a big bad revealed. A big bad is revealed. It is quite horrific. I don't agree with elements of this reveal. So, her dad isn't really the wonderful person that she thought he was. He did bad stuff. No shit, he's human. Most humans do bad stuff. And then we go for a trope that I really despise. So she remembers her childhood as her dad being nice to her a lot of the time and her mother being batshit crazy. Turns out her dad wasn't the amazing, wonderful doctor that everyone loved. He was a bad husband and potentially a bad father. But she remembers good stuff with him. She remembers happiness. He was good to her. Her mother, on the other hand, wasn't. Now, having discovered that her father wasn't who she thought he was, and what child ever really knows an adult anyway? Not really. But now her dad is exposed as a bad guy. That automatically makes her mother the good person. And this is a trope I despise because a lot of people fall into thinking this way in real life. And it's dangerous. Her father may not have been the good person she remembered, but he was good to her. Her mother may not be as 100% bad as she imagined as a child, because again, child, adult doesn't work, but she was still bad to her. She was still abusive. She was still batshit crazy. And not every story has to have a good guy and a bad guy. They can all just be bad guys, you know. This story attempts to promote the notion that if your dad was bad, then your mum must have been good. And I've seen a lot of people burnt with that theory in real life. So I don't love it as a plot theme at all. Layla, however, in these later bits, most of the time behaves like a normal human being, except after she discovers the big bad about her father, where she goes off the rail. In this second part, you have more people who actually have conversations, actually have interesting things happening to them, and actually feel like real people. It's just that you have to slog through the first half or the first 2/3 of this novel before you get any of that. And I didn't love that. Now, I'm going to talk a bit about the author, because whilst reading this book, I was often so annoyed that I wanted to know where the hell this stuff came from. So, 2014 PhD, and she wrote a novel. I actually looked up that novel. Sorry, she wrote a book, a non-novel book. It's called Finding the Plot, A Maternal Approach to Madness in Literature. And this is based on her PhD. So the concept seems to be that over the last 50 years, feminist literary criticism has become theoretical rather than practical, blah, 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 blah. One of the disconnects that she finds in this is the way the madwoman in feminist literature has become a lauded icon of liberation. And what she's saying here is that the madwoman in literature is far from liberated. If anything, she is the opposite. She has been driven insane by presumably the patriarchy or society or something. I would suggest it's often driven insane by hormones and lack of adequate doctoring and psychological care, but whatever. I feel like something from that PhD has bled into this book, because basically speaking, in the first part of it, every single woman is crazy. Layla is not sane in her reaction to life. She is not sane in how much she concentrates on the past, and her responses to her mother's repeated cries for attention aren't particularly sane either. Her older sister Willow is living in Sri Lanka on tree platforms to stop loggers because there's no trees that need saving in Australia. I don't know about that, but she doesn't sound like she's a particularly well-balanced individual either, which may or may not be due to the crap dad. We never find out. Layla's mother is off the wall crazy and has been since childhood, and there's no point in blaming the father for that. Sounds like she was crazy early on. Why? We don't know. Did she ever get care? Not apparently so. So that's 3 mad female characters already. The aunt, Dawn, moved in with Layla when she was desperate for help, having just gone back to work with 2 babies at home. And one of the few things that I think Layla actually feels justifiably guilty for is the fact that because her husband, Gabe, I think, didn't like her, she kicked her out into a nursing home. Now, Gabe is clearly the wrong person for her, and their relationship is clearly not a relationship. He's been sleeping on the sofa for ages. She knows that he has other lovers. On page 106, during a flashback to a few years ago, Layla whines about not being able to figure out how she could have done things differently. Really? Really? Because not putting her aunt in the nursing home would be a great idea. This is probably something that she should feel guilty about, but can she really not figure out what she should have done here? Because everyone reading this can. Her husband and her aren't getting on. She is pouring all the money she earns as an anaesthetist, which is a not inconsiderable amount in Australia, into keeping his business afloat, their mortgage underway, and their lifestyle underway. Can you not think what you might want to do? And she blames all this on her not giving him what he needs. Pass the bucket. And this is the thing, in the first part of the novel, you get that a lot. I couldn't figure out to do, what should I do? I can't imagine. We can. We're reading this. It's really, really obvious what you should do. So, yeah. That covers every single female in the first part of the book, I think. And they're all crazy in one way or another. So I think that did bleed out of this PhD. And I really don't know that I should, but I can't help wondering, Megan Rogers, she's been teaching for 10 years now. I can't help wondering how much of modern Australian contemporary fiction has flashbacks because of her. I was nearly tempted at one stage when I just couldn't bear to read any more of this hot steaming mess. I was tempted to go and see how many of the authors whose novels I have not enjoyed over the years credit Megan Rogers or thank her in the acknowledgements in any way. Because I've got a feeling, at the very least, that she's part of this Russian doll flashback theme, but a few novels that could have been really good novels have been ruined by it. And yeah, it's probably not fair to blame her, but she has been teaching for 10 years, and a lot of novels, I kind of moved away from reading Australian contemporary fiction because the flashbacks are schizophrenic, and they are in all of them. I understand that prize judging committees like the Booker and stuff love them, and they're always nominating them or awarding them, but I am not a judge on a panel. I'm a person who reads for enjoyment, and it's not enjoyable. Right, so that's me whinging for 25 minutes about The Heart is a Star, which, the author probably doesn't deserve because it's very well written for its specific target audience, who would appear to be professional women with children at home juggling their life-work balance. It's a new novel. It's from 2023, April-ish. It's published by HarperCollins. The cover design is by Hazel Lamb from the HarperCollins Design Studio. And I want to mention that particularly, remember, Hazel Lamb, because that is a beautiful cover. It's the type of cover that I've seen around recently, but I do like it. And it does the wraparound, so you've got something pretty on the spine, you've got something pretty on the back. Lovely cover. I didn't get it for the cover, I got it for the recommendation. And a last comment has to be that of the reviews that I've read about this book, and I didn't read these reviews beforehand because I didn't want to be influenced by them, but of the reviews on Goodreads that I've read since, the feelings on this book tend to be really mixed. And I've got a lot of Australian readers. I'm actually part of the Aussie Readers Group. A lot of Australian readers who read Australian books by preference. You've got a few people who absolutely loved it. 4 or 5 stars, couldn't put it down, absolutely loved it. And then you've got a lot more like me who, even in their art copies, had to give a very measured response to this. Many of them liked it, enjoyed elements of it, like I did. Many of them had issues with it, and they usually weren't the same issues I've had. So if you're considering The Heart is a Star by Megan Rogers, I would encourage you to read reviews first. There's a number of reasons why it may not be for you. Anyway, thank you for listening to my first Australian contemporary review for 2024. It hasn't lured me back into Australian fiction, I've got to say. I think I'm going straight back to sci-fi for a while. Classic sci-fi, while it can be disappointing, is very rarely as annoying as I found this book to be. Sorry, Megan Rogers, but you're doing fine without me. One negative review won't matter. If you love this book, please, by all means, comment. Tell me that I'm wrong. I'm good with it. I've been being wrong for years. Comment, talk, whatever.